I got to tell you guys about a few new products over at our favorite CBD store. That's, of course, PalomaVerdeCBD.com. The first thing I'm going to tell you about that's brand new over there is these THCV gummies. There's 10 milligrams of THCV per gummy and 10 gummies per jar. A lot of y'all are probably familiar with this THCV. Some people call it diet weed. It's very good for intermittent fasters. THCV helps suppress or dull your appetite, which, of course, a little bit unlike regular THC that, as you probably know, or at least you've heard, can give you the munchies. THCV helps promote energy, unlike regular THC, which, of course, makes you feel kind of mellow. This is legal, oh my God, legal under the Farm Bill. So thank you, Farm Bill. The second thing I want to tell you about that's new over at PalomaVerdeCBD.com is their full spectrum nano CBD soft gels. These have the perfect amount of CBD with THC. 25 milligrams of CBD and 0.27 milligrams of THC per soft gel. Their everyday formula brings your body back to homeostasis and adds this nice extra layer of chill. I like that. I think you do too. A lot of us need that now and again, or maybe every day. Nanotechnology allows better absorption into your body, even better than their other products, which was already amazing. Again, this has a calming effect and it lasts about 6 to 8 hours. And of course, like the other stuff, it's legal under what? The Farm Bill. Thank you, Farm Bill. It's legal. I would not get you guys in trouble. Go over to PalomaVerdeCBD.com. They've got a lot of great products. I talk about them all the time. The massage oil. They've got the sleep bundle. They got nano CBD soft gels, CBD bath bombs, which are amazing. Gummies, tinctures, all of that stuff. Of course, for my French bulldogs, Lux and George, the pet tinctures and the pet gummies. All of these things are over at PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Oh yeah, did I tell you about the cool menthol sports cream? Of course I have before. It's the best sports cream in the world. I get reviews from customers on this all the time. That's the number one thing I like from this company. And they've got all of these great things. Over at PalomaVerdeCBD.com, you will get a promo code because Carlos and Vanessa, the owners, love this show and they want to help out the listeners of this show. Promo code BUCK at checkout gets you 20% off of your order over at PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Promo code BUCK at checkout gets you 20% off of your order. Go give them business and in turn, give me business. Now, let's get back to the show.
You are now listening to the Counterflow podcast, a place for dissonant voices and unapproved opinions.
You get split in fucking half, but I call the hologram graph. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Here is your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson.
What's going on, you guys? Welcome back once again to the Counterflow podcast. So happy you have joined me for yet another week where I had mentioned this last week, and I'll do this, if I can remember, in several consecutive episodes. And I guess why not just do it most of them after that? But we're getting a group together. And by that, I mean, if you want to donate to this show, it's at patreon.com/counterflow. The group getting together will be anyone who is a $5 or more per month patron to this show. If you are in that club, every so often, I'm going to try to do it once a month is what my goal would be. We're going to do a Zoom call, myself and every one of you who donates at least $5 a month at patreon.com/counterflow. Sometimes I will have a guest as well come on with us. It'll be a good time to discuss whatever y'all want. Q&A if it's me, Q&A if it's a guest. We can have group discussions, any of that you want. Once a month, we will do that. It will not be a podcast episode, and it will not be a YouTube episode. It will just be exclusively on Zoom, live, with you guys who donate $5 or more per month at patreon.com/counterflow. So, I guess the big news since we've last spoken, my election. It happened here in Lockhart where I ran for Lockhart City Council, one of the 2 at-large positions, meaning I would represent all of Lockhart, not just one specific district. And I lost. Can you believe that? I will say, I'm so used, my past was coming up through libertarian politics where they would get like 1% of the vote. I got 14%, and it was my first time. And I thought, well, geez, compared to what I was used to seeing from people that ran for the Libertarian Party, 14% sounds pretty good. So basically some of the lessons. I don't want to tell you all of the lessons I learned because, I don't know, opposition research for the future could be out there. I will say this. It was 3 of us running for 2 seats. My 2 opponents were born and raised here. I mentioned that last week. So, of course, their names were well known. They were incumbents also. Both of them already were holding these seats. They had 0 signs anywhere around town, no mailers at all. And each one of them got around 2,000 votes or so. And I got 680 or 700, somewhere in there. And I thought, man, I got more votes than I thought I was going to get. And then I thought, they really got more votes than I thought they were going to get. So that's one lesson, that's for sure. The incumbency has its place as far as name recognition, of course, and certainly it's a small town. If you were born and raised here, everyone knows you. So those were some obstacles for me to overcome. There will be future plans in that realm, and I'll unveil those as time gets closer. So on to this show. My friend Adam Patrick is back with us this week. It's been a while since I've had Adam on. It's been a while since he's done a lot of things. He used to run the You're Talking Over Me podcast, where he kind of started that during COVID. We're going to get into this, of course, but he started that during COVID and was kind of navigating through some of those crazy waters where what's going on politically, culturally, what is this all about? And of course, as time went on, it became a little bit more clear on what some of that was about. And so at some point, he kept going through the political realm. And then you might have noticed that some of us navigate through the political part of it. And then it's like we go past state, we go past nation. And at some point, we go even past the material world. And we're getting into this spiritual warfare and the spiritual battle that's much broader than, let's just say, the United States and its COVID policies. So it all ties together, though. That's the thing. We don't just stop before we get to the spiritual part. We keep going and go through that as well, because ultimately that is what a lot of this, well, probably all of this, has to do with. So Adam is doing that too, of course, and he took a break from You're Talking Over Me, and he's back now, getting ready. He's compiling some episodes together, which is a smart thing to do if you're starting anew. Get several episodes in the bank, and then you're under less pressure to hurry up and get your next guest. So you can start releasing them on a weekly basis, and they're already done months before that happens. So little tip, if you're going to start a podcast, that's a good way to do it. And that's what Adam's doing. The new show is called The Age of Information. What he's going to do is get into the spiritual aspect of a lot of these issues we're facing, past the material aspect. And I assume he's going to include both because, well, you should include both, because the spiritual often expresses itself through the material, as you know. So we're going to get into that. So an interesting aspect of this whole thing is if you're looking at this spiritual battle from a Western perspective, i.e. your average American perspective, it's so much different than the Eastern perspective. And the Eastern perspective is a much older one, especially when it comes to orthodoxy. And we're going to get into the differences of that. What's that mean, the Western perspective on spirituality or religion or Christianity or even orthodoxy? What is the Western perspective? Why is that different? Why is that different than the Eastern perspective? We get into a lot of cool issues just basically surrounding that general topic. And I will waste your time no longer. I think you'll learn a lot from this one. I know I did. And I think once you hear this, you're going to say, I want to hear Adam's new show, The Age of Information. But for now, he's on this one. Adam Patrick, welcome back, sir. How are you?
Good to be here, Buck. Man, I feel like we haven't talked in like 10 days.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, tell people, well, we won't get into that yet. We will at some point here. You did the You're Talking Over Me podcast. That's how we met. And you will soon be doing the Age of Information podcast. So we'll get into what that transformation's been like. And I guess really, I was going to say do an intro for my listeners who've not heard you before, because it's been a long time since you've been on here. But basically, I think this intro can be kind of surmised in what you did with You're Talking Over Me and the journey that you're taking to the age of information. Say that 5 times fast. So get into any of that you want, and we'll jump off from there.
There's actually a great band called The Age of Information. And I think the lead singer used to play for Evanescence. And they put out one album, and it's really good. They have some Christian underleanings and undertones. And actually that website was that band for a while, so I couldn't get it. And then all of a sudden they only put out that one album maybe in the mid 2000s or something. And then it just vanished and I picked the website up. So I'd actually wanted to do that name for a really long time. So I guess the quick sum up is, I grew up Roman Catholic and with a philosophy and mythology and English professor as a dad and a kind of a psychologist as a mom. And so you can see all the books and all the stuff I grew up kind of reading. I started really questioning Roman Catholicism from a philosophical background and from an early church fathers background back in my kind of mid-teens, late teens, and ended up sort of falling away from the Roman Catholic Church because I wasn't really seeing what I was reading in the Bible and Scripture, in exegesis, hermeneutics, the church fathers. I wasn't seeing in the Roman Catholic Church that, and believing that I'm not capable of interpreting Scripture on my own. Right, that I just decided, well, I'm just not a Christian, I guess. But I kept doing biblical work, biblical studies over the years as kind of a hobby, just like, reading Plato or anything, right? And then kind of fell into the libertarian camp by accident, sort of being kind of a peaceful anarchist, sort of, no gods, no rule. Now, I shouldn't say no gods, no rulers. I don't think I ever said that, but that's kind of what people think when they see that, and kind of falling into that milieu. But not super seriously, and finding myself having a lot of, I wasn't really getting along in that group either. Some of the things just seemed really cringy and very materialistic and not very loving. But libertarian doctrine and all kind of seemed a lot like Roman Catholicism, but like the inverse. And then COVID happened, and I got to know folks like yourself, Piquignones, Vin Armani. It was really the series that Vin Armani did with Piquignones on magic. That really resonated with me almost immediately. And through him, essentially, through Vin, I found Orthodox Christianity, which, much to my surprise and joy, was saying pretty much all the stuff that I was saying 25 years ago. Right? I didn't know there was a home for that. So it was an easy sort of quote unquote conversion to sort of slide into that style of Christianity. For me, it came very natural. And what I realized, and I think a lot of us did during COVID, was people are going to worship something, right? We have this innate need to worship something. And if it isn't God, it's going to be government, or it's going to be ourselves, or it's going to be Fauci or whatever. And so I kind of squared the circle on libertarianism, which was what the You're Talking Over Me podcast was about. Kind of sort of my journey out of that. And then I took about a year off, about October to October, more or less. And, we bought a home here in Southern Connecticut, started a new job, got out of the bar industry, and really just kind of have been putting myself back through reading the things I was reading 20 years ago and re-listening. Now they're in podcast form. A lot of them are audiobook or whatever, Kindle. And kind of going back through that and rejuvenating that interest. And so with the age of information, I really wanted to, in the only way a layman can really do it, bring people on who I can talk to about the kind of the principles and the theology and the way of life of Orthodox Christianity, and present it to an American audience, many of whom, when they think of Christianity, might think something along the lines of like the Pope diddling kids and Trump and conservatives and like Puritanism, or I don't know, whatever.
Yes.
And just sort of show them that that is not necessarily, and I don't believe is at all, what Christianity is. So being in the technology age, we have information that we don't have to latch on to somebody like Martin Luther, his apologetics in 1522. We can realize that he didn't have access to what we have access to now, and we can maybe forgive him for that, right? And sympathize and empathize with where he was at that moment. But now we're in 2022 and we don't have to follow those things anymore because we have the information readily at our fingertips. So that's kind of what I wanted to do.
Something you just touched upon is something I wanted to ask you about. In my experience, and again, we should also state off from the top here, Adam nor Buck Johnson are experts in Orthodox Christianity. We will be discussing this kind of stuff from our, as the left likes to say, lived experience. And so just a disclaimer out there, if you are genuinely interested in this, in Orthodox Christianity, I have plenty of people I can direct you to, as I'm sure Adam does too. And there are times when I get messages saying, thank you for putting this episode out. I've started going to an Orthodox church, and that's not because of me. So that's, it's almost when I hear that, I love hearing it. And at the same time, I'm like, man, that's a little heavy. So just that up front. But getting back to what I was going to ask you, you said a lot of people, when they think of Christianity, again, they'll think of the Pope with the pedophilia issue that's gone through the Catholic Church. I know people that have personally been affected by that, and it is real and it is awful. Or they'll think of the kind of boomer cons, the evangelical type stuff, and Trump's connection with Israel and things like that. And I guess I see a lot of that. And when I hear insults directed at Christianity that I initially will take personally, although I shouldn't, it hits me like, wait a second, they're not talking about orthodoxy. They're talking about this Western puritanical version of what they think Christianity is. Ironically enough, they're being in some ways puritanical, and they're kind of basing what they're even saying in Western Christianity and a Western mindset. Do you see that same thing? Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Oh yeah, man. And I really can't do Twitter anymore. It's just sort of the end of me, but it's hard to keep up with everything on there. But on Facebook, I will post ambiguous sort of, theological stuff, or kind of throw things out there, and sometimes comment on random people's posts or whatever. And really, I'm trying to get a sense of what that person thinks when they hear the word Christianity, because much like Second Temple Judaism, there's just a lot of Christian sects around, right? And I don't think that's a kind of an offbeat or unrealistic thing to say, right? Like there's, things that are more similar, like Roman Catholicism and Orthodoxy, and then maybe Lutheranism, High Anglicanism, right? And then you start drifting off to the fringes and you start getting things that aren't even Christian, like Jehovah's Witnesses or whatever. And a lot of times, all that sort of gets lumped together, and under the banner of whatever the topic is of the day, right? Whether it's an abortion thing or a Supreme Court thing, or
right.
A lot of people under the impression that, the God of the Old Testament's an angry, vengeful God, and the God of the New Testament just wants everybody to hug and pat each other on the back and live and let live, like it's Ron Paul or something. And no offense to Ron Paul, but he's not Jesus Christ. I know that's going to offend probably some lost souls out there, but it's trying to get an idea of what people are thinking, because if messaged properly, I don't think an honest explanation of orthodoxy is. I haven't had any pushback, right? There's people who have really come out swinging, thinking that obviously I'm a Trump supporter, or obviously I must watch Elevation on TV on Sunday, or whatever mass worship technological nonsense comes on the television. And I get that, man. Like that's a poor message coming out of those places, and there's a natural instinct to react to them, mostly because the Christian undergirdings of modern day pagans and atheists, right, like are reacting to bad Christianity, and that's like ingrained in Christendom, ingrained in our culture. So the natural tendency of somebody who's trans or gay or liberal or progressive, right, is sort of, they don't realize it, but their argument they're making back is like, that doesn't sound like Christianity, but they're not like accepting Christianity. So there's that natural instinct. And when you play off of that, you can say, well, listen, here's what, I believe orthodoxy is quote unquote true Christianity, but that doesn't mean that somebody who's a Methodist isn't a true Christian, right? Like it's not a judgment of the human.
Right.
I can't even say someone that's a Mormon or someone who's from the Jewish faith. I can't even say that person's like not a Christian in their heart. I don't know. Right. I do know that there are certain teachings that lead to certain places, and a lot of those places are destructive for the self and for people around those people. So I can say that, and then I can say what Christianity is, and at least it's out there what it is, right? And if they want to deny what it is on its face, that's fine. But at least we can try to correct the record, or at the very least, what I hope to do is point, like you said, point people to, well, if this is a stimulating idea, you should go check out Father John Strickland, or you should go listen to Father Stephen DeYoung, or you should go, point them in a direction where there's somebody who can really, really break it down on a theological level that I can't, So I think that's, getting those underpinnings of Christianity from the kind of pagan atheist point of view. The real struggle well, I shouldn't say it's a struggle, but it's more of a struggle with our brothers and sisters from different flavors of Christianity, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, in that case, I just try to find similarities, right? Like there's a huge kind of Yahweh push, like a Jewish Christianity push going on now, like in the modern church, where there's a lot of bringing, Yeshua back as a name instead of Jesus, that kind of like ritual kind of Jewish focus that I think has a lot of commonalities with Orthodoxy, but there's some differences. So we try to find the commonality there, build some kind of a relationship between two human beings. And then much like I did with Mike Corbell, who's a Mormon, right? We got to build a friendship over time. And now we can have actual honest discussions, in person, on shows, on Facebook. And there's people jumping in who are like backing me or backing him. And it's like, no, we're friends, man. Like, you don't have to do that. So I think that's kind of where I would go with that.
I want to ask about, one of the reasons I got you on here is because I've heard you discuss Eastern view of spirituality, Christianity versus, and I don't want to say versus like it's one against the other, but sometimes it is, the Western view. And people will hear that who don't know about this topic and say, what do you mean? How is that different? What's the biggest difference? Is it literally people in the Western world versus people in the Eastern world? What's the mindset, as we say in Orthodoxy, the phronema? Can you kind of, I guess I want to get into that Eastern version of Christianity versus the Western version and maybe the mindset behind it. And again, neither one of us are experts in this. We're both learning it, and we're surrounded, we're swimming in the Western view of everything. And so this is a tough aspect of this whole thing, but let's talk about that.
Sure. Well, one of the distinctions to make is, and I'm going to come at this from an Orthodox point of view. So I realize I'm not trying to say like, I am trying to say this is historically accurate, right? I'm going to try to say this in the most historically accurate way possible and not as like a selling point for Orthodox Christianity.
Okay.
And I think if we're going to start anywhere with where the spiritual differences go, there's basically two really, really big players in Western Christianity prior to the schism. Obviously, we're going to have to talk about St. Augustine, and then we're going to have to talk about Charlemagne.
Mm-hmm.
Like those two characters really changed Western Christianity from what it seems to have always been from the resurrection of Christ up until, the early 5th century, and start turning it into what it becomes during the Scholastic age, through the Thomas Aquinas age, and then eventually the Reformation, the Renaissance, and then into the Enlightenment. It's like a clear trajectory, right? Prior to Augustine, I'm going to say Augustine. I know I'm probably saying it wrong, but it rolls off the tongue better.
Sure.
Prior to Augustine, really the whole idea of spirituality in Christianity is an experiential thing, right? The liturgy, the actual act of going to the church, to the ecclesia, right, to the assembly in Christianity, predated the gospel according to anyone, predated Paul's epistles, right? There was Christianity before there was a Bible.
Yes.
There was a gospel before there was a gospel according to anyone. So
yeah, and just to interrupt real quick, I had someone, an evangelical, tell me that maybe questioning or trying to push back a little bit on Orthodoxy, said, because I said it was the Christianity from the book of Acts. And he said, well, there's Christianity before the Bible. And I said, I know it was also Orthodox, but go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, right. Both and.
Yeah, so, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's always been very experiential. So the idea of theosis or divination, is the idea, and this is all the Greek church fathers, right? All the way up through the 4th century. Talk about the essence energies distinction, which you're familiar with. Maybe a lot of your listeners will be familiar with. And it's saying that the
some
essence
won't. So kind of help walk through this.
The essence of God is the God that you can't ever know, right? It's outside of human comprehension. And the energies of God is God working in the world. It's what we would call grace, right? The grace of God is God's energies, and that's what works in the world. And so human beings who become Christian are participating actively in this world, in that relationship with God. It is a back and forth relationship where we do something, he does something, we do something, he does something. Now his energies are always present. So this might, just to because I see some Protestant brothers and sisters getting a little, his energy is always present. We have to, of course, react to that, right? So there has to be an initial move on our part. But then we fulfill essentially the theosis, right? The becoming God ourselves, becoming the godlike energy that we were created to be, right? We were created in the image and likeness of God. And so theosis and divination is about getting back to that relationship through using our spiritual organ, the nous, which people have heard me talk about and you're familiar with. That's what it kind of always was. It's a very, let's say, optimistic anthropology of the human being. It's looking at the human being in a very dignified way. There's a lot of human dignity in early Christianity. And then for simplistic reasons, because we don't have 5 hours to talk about St. Augustine, St. Augustine comes along. He's basically coming out of a Manichaeist background, right? A dualist background of Manichaeism started by the quote unquote prophet Mani. And then he sort of evolves into Neoplatonism, and then he sort of evolves into Christianity. His mother was Christian, his father was pagan. He was very like kind of hedonistic as a kid. He's got all these kind of like different ideas rolling around in there. And he comes along and he does some really weird things that probably because Rome is falling at this time, as he writes about in the very large book, City of God. He has a very pessimistic view of the human anthropology. And because of this, he comes up with a lot of ideas like predestination, purgatory, children, going to hell before they're baptized. His idea of free will is basically a battle against Pelagius at the time. He was deemed a Christian heretic, but I think is coming around to more of a lighter view in modern times. We don't have a lot written by Pelagius, but his sort of heresy was that human beings have ultimate free will, autonomous of God, right? That we don't need God to participate in our lives. He had a very also dignified view of human anthropology, but this is the heresy part, that God doesn't participate at all. And he's reacting to seeing Christians in Rome at that time sort of going about their business and not really doing anything Christian, right? And so rather than kind of evolve into the Greek fathers' position, Augustine does what a lot of Western Christians do and just does the polar opposite of that. So he basically comes and says, man is total depravity. Our sin has gotten so bad, we don't have the ability to choose right from wrong anymore, and therefore God does all the work. Right. And that like leads into a lot of real problems. You start getting a God who is all about retributive justice, right? About punishment. It's all about punishment. There's a lot of focus in the Western church on the death and passion of Christ, as opposed to the resurrection and life after death of Christ, which is more of an Eastern tradition. I don't know why he was the one everybody focused on. Maybe because he just wrote a lot and he was very prominent. And where he was too in North Africa, there was a lot of different heresies going on. So he had a variety pack of things to argue with people about. So he wrote a lot. So I guess that's a quick summation of him. And then when you get up into the Carolingian dynasty, which Charlemagne in the 8th century, 9th century, basically the Franks sort of co-opt the Roman church, the Western church, and start changing a lot of things around in the mass. Like they go from praying like this to praying like this, holding your hands out, and into kind of the prayer thing we know now where their palms pushed together. They push the Latin, right, which is not ever biblical or part of the gospel. You're supposed to talk in the language of the people who are speaking, that you're speaking to, which is what the Eastern Church has always done. So it basically like elevates Latin to a certain language, unleavened bread in the Eucharist, like all kinds of stuff like that. And so they sort of double down on that issue. But anyway, the point of all of that is to say that the Western church turns from a very positive, optimistic view of human dignity, human nature, and a relationship with God that can be experienced in this world right now, to like none of that, right? Like none of that at all. God is eternally looking to punish you for everything you've done wrong. You live in total depravity. You have guilt for all the sins before you. Your children are going to hell if they don't get baptized. He demands all of these things from you. And that, of course, eventually leads to two things. It leads to a very corrupt church, number one, which the Protestant reformers don't go back to the gospel. They go back to Augustine, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Calvin is basically the logical extrapolation, the logical endpoint of St. Augustine's writing. He picks up all of those ideas and follows them to their logical conclusion. And then you have the Renaissance and essentially the Enlightenment or secular humanism, which is basically a fair reply to the pessimism of the Roman Catholic and Protestant churches, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, humans are actually good people. This return to the very, very Neoplatonic kind of pagan roots that Augustine had before he converted, they go back to that. And they're trying to find they're basically rewriting paganism, rewriting the pre-Christian Greek and Roman empires and pretending they didn't like sacrifice their own children and, have, multiple wives and slaves and leave their babies out in the street and trying to like make it about 16th century, 17th century Europe. And it's a natural reaction. So the East has its own problems with the emperor, which is essentially the reason there becomes a quote unquote pope in the West in the first place. They were actually, a lot of the popes were basically trying to save Christianity from corrupt emperors who were just deposing bishops and patriarchs all over the place and playing politics. A lot of the popes did a really good job at that. And at some point it sort of switches. The Eastern Empire gets overtaken by the Turks and we live in the product of the West. So there always was this spirituality in the East. There always was kind of taught the same way in the churches, the same thing that those early church fathers in the Greek were saying. It kind of has always continued where the West is constantly trying to figure out where it stands, especially the Roman Catholic Church now, which, because they believe in human reason as a benchmark or a pinnacle of doctrine and canon, they can constantly kind of change things over time and react to this. And well, we got this wrong, we'll go with that. And not sure how they do that with the Pope, who's infallible, but depends on the Pope. So
right.
I think I don't even remember the original question was spirituality, but I think the retention of that in the East, and also being under 450 years of Ottoman Turk subjugation, as I've said before, Christianity does really, really well when it's not in charge.
Yeah.
And it tends to get corrupted very quickly when it is in charge, like most things, because people are flawed and sinful, and technically, Christianity is not supposed to be in charge of the government, right? It's supposed to be in charge of you and your family and your community.
I know that I'm not alone when I tell you that Fox & Sons is my go-to coffee. I know I'm not alone. I hear this advertising on some other podcasts out there, but I'm being honest, it is my go-to coffee. Stephen Fox, a long-time listener of this show, longer than those other shows where he's advertising on. I'm just telling you, he has created Fox & Sons Coffee because of his passion for the absolute best coffee, a desire to share entrepreneurship with his sons, which I think is great, and a tribute to his father, also great. If you visit foxandsons.com, that's Fox and then the letter N, foxandsons.com, you'll be able to read about Steve's special Saturday mornings with his father, which is when he says his great love of coffee began. You've probably heard about Fox & Sons on other podcasts. I know that. And the praise for this coffee is well deserved. I do have to admit that. Like I said, as a longtime supporter of Counterflow, Steve did save the best deal for my listeners. So go to foxandsons.com and use code BUCK25, BUCK25, to get 25% off of any order over $25. Pretty easy to remember, right? BUCK25, get you 25% off any order over $25. This is the best deal you are going to get, and it is running through the entire month of November. I highly recommend that you try Fox & Sons coffee. You'll want to order more before the end of the month, and coffee makes a great gift. Think about that too. Christmas is coming up. I don't say the holidays on this show. Christmas is coming up, so think of Fox & Sons when you're buying gifts, and you get 25% off with BUCK25. Think about that. So do it now. It supports this show. It supports a good listener of this show and a good entrepreneur. Delicious coffee. What more is there? Thank you, guys. Let's get back to the show. One of the things that's been, I suppose, this East-West kind of mindset divide that's been tough for me, and I'm figuring out that could be part of it into my journey into Orthodoxy, is that someone will say to me, something like, so what was the service about? Or, so what's the Orthodox stance on abortion, or whatever the topic of the day? And it's, for a while, it hit me like, I don't know how to answer this. And I'm not sure why I don't know how to answer it. But I think it has something to do now with the Eastern phronema, or the Orthodox mindset, the Eastern mindset, whatever it may be called, for the purposes of this discussion. That's part of it. And getting away from a Western view of religion, because it is common I grew up Protestant, and it is common to go, hey, what was the service about? And because the pastor would talk for an hour, so you would know what it was about. And something's different now. I'm able to articulate, as you know, and a lot of listeners understand, the if you want to call it preaching part of orthodoxy, to use a Western term, is very short. It's 5 to 15 minutes of the service that's 2.5 hours long. So the rest of it isn't that sermon, if you will. So I guess I'm asking, is that something you're experiencing, you have experienced? Is that a Western versus Eastern thing? Because some of the questions, I have answers for them, and I know there are answers, but it just sounds weird to me now, understanding orthodoxy, even though it's just a little bit as I understand it, but it is more than it was. So I'm starting to figure this out. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, the homily, which for anyone who is not Orthodox or Roman Catholic, is the word means same. So the gospel would be preached, and then the presbyter or the priest would come out and they would say the same thing, but in a way that related to the people in the listening to it. So that evolves into kind of the Protestant quote unquote worship service, where it's just a lecture, right? It's a 50-minute lecture, and then you sing some songs, and then you go home, right? And the lectures, at least in the Protestant churches I've been to, are usually pretty good, right? So they're really good lectures. They're really good Bible studies, right? And but I think the difference is the experiential part. You're not really experiencing anything there you couldn't experience on YouTube, right? Or you couldn't experience reading a book. So there's a kind of a literal detachment from reality, whereas the Divine Liturgy, and to some extent the Latin Mass, not so much anymore, but originally is designed to basically teach you Christianity through participation, through ritual, right? And so they're basically picking up, and at the time Christianity sort of quote unquote starts, or is seen as a word or a concept outside of Judaism. The Christians are just doing what the Jews were doing in the synagogues, right, on Saturdays, and then they're adding on what we'd call the liturgy of the Eucharist, or I think that's what the Orthodox call it. I'm still stuck in Roman Catholicism sometimes, but the idea of communing with the body and blood of Christ, we just sort of tacked on to the end of that. And in the Orthodox Church, if you are able to find one that does the daily services, which is even more difficult in a place where there's lots of Orthodox churches, like up here, you work through the entire New Testament minus the book of Revelation throughout the entire year, through the 365 days. And through the chanting, through the communication, through the hymns, through the readings, you're basically teaching somebody Christianity while they're participating in it with you. And that doesn't require a lecture. It also teaches you a way of life, because it gets you into a mode where you're constantly doing the same thing all the time, right? The same way we get up in the morning, brush your teeth, take a shower, take the dogs out, have a donut, get in the car, drive to work. Like, it becomes part of your... So the idea of the liturgy is for Christianity to become your routine. Now, the routine isn't go to the ritual. The routine is do it and live it once you leave. Like the most important part of the liturgy, and the reason that the Roman Catholics call it a mass, is the dismissal. Is when you're going, you go out into the world to be Christian and to bring other people into the church. That is, I think, a lot of Orthodox priests have said that's the second or third most important part. Obviously, most important part is Christ, but the dismissal, which is what the word mass means. So that part of the community kind of coming around together to participate in this living tradition with the living God, right, through a Jesus Christ that is there in your presence, is it's also really difficult. It's very, very easy to listen to a lecture.
Yeah.
Right. It's very easy for me to do that. It's very, very difficult for me to get up early and to drive down and to stand for 3 hours.
Yeah.
And to participate in something that I have the Roman Catholic Mass memorized. Like I grew up in that. Like about 10 years ago, they changed some of the words in some of the things, but for the most part, I could rattle it off the top of my head, like rattling off Back to the Future quotes or something.
Mm-hmm.
But the Orthodox liturgy, I still get kind of used to it. So sometimes it's still a little bit uncomfortable. I want to fit in. I know other people aren't making me uncomfortable, but so it's very difficult to do those things. It's very difficult to know what to do or how to feel or how to act. It's very easy to sit there in a chair and listen to someone talk.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's why most people do that. Why 8 million people every week watch Joel Osteen is because it's comforting and nice and kind and cute and telling them everything they want to know to affirm their own belief system. And they can do it on the couch while they're eating some eggs and bacon, right? And they can watch it on TV. I don't know if that changes you into something, right? The same way I don't know if watching Care Bears Christmas changes you into anything. But I do know that when you participate in something on a ritual basis, it changes you. Like COVID ritual changes people, right?
Right.
So if somebody who isn't Christian is looking for an example, look at COVID. Look at that ritual. Changed half the population. Well, and maybe the other half in the other way.
Yeah,
right. So
it certainly changed to us. You and me. I know that because we talked a lot over COVID years. That's, again, like you mentioned earlier, that's how you got your first podcast started. I want to actually ask you about that now. That's what a good segue artist you are here. I think at this point, quote unquote normies can look back at 2020 and 2021 and have some agreement with people like you and me, whereas, I don't know, a year and a half ago, a lot of people would consider us fringe based on some of the things we would say about what was going on with COVID and the masking and the lockdowns and the jabs and all of this stuff. In fact, as we speak, tomorrow is election day. I know you don't love politics at this point, but I do suspect that if a red wave comes, which I kind of lean towards probably happening, part of that is a reaction to the horrible COVID stuff that we have seen. Let's talk about that really quick. What are your thoughts on 2020, 2021, the COVID cult, all of that, and the spirituality part of it? Because a lot of us, including me for sure, were changed over those few years spiritually because of things that I saw. So I want to get your take on that.
Yeah, I think if I hadn't grown up Roman Catholic, I don't think I would have seen it as much. And what seeing people basically turn into mass hysterics, basically overnight, kind of showed me was it also showed me that I was a libertarian, quote unquote, for the wrong reasons, right? That really what I was somebody who was a Christian who didn't know they were a Christian, exemplifying Christian ideas through libertarianism, which is why I would constantly be a little bit left libertarian and be a little bit right libertarian and kind of not like this thing the libertarians did. I never could quite situate myself in that. The idea of anarchism, at least the way I internalized it, was, no human being should be forced to submit to any other human being's will, right? The coercion, the force. What I didn't really put together was that Christians aren't really called to do that. They're not really called to be rebels. As a matter of fact, they're distinctly told over and over and over again in Scripture, specifically in the New Testament, all the gospel accounts, Paul's epistles, not to do any of that, right? That the people in authority are given authority from God for whatever reason God sees fit to give them that authority. And your job is to not worry about that at all. Do what they tell you to do, right? And the reason that the Christians leave Jerusalem before the fall of Rome is because Paul essentially Christ tells them, don't get involved in rebellion. Don't stay there. It's going to be destroyed. These people are going to fight back. Don't be those people. Get out of there. And they get out of there, right? So there's something sort of anarchic about that, about not wanting to, not seeing legitimacy of human authority, but understanding that Christianity calls you not to be rebellious against it. It's kind of a hard thing to reconcile, right? Because even within somebody rediscovering Christianity, there's still that sort of liberty, freedom, America kind of streak in us, where
Yeah.
like obviously I want to defend my family. Something happens, I don't want anyone to commit violence against me. It's not like I'm going to go out and get beaten in the street. You know what I mean? I'm probably going to fight back, right? I'm going to just admit to what I would probably do. And that's probably not the right thing to do. But yeah, the COVID thing, it was when you see a religion develop in front of you and you have the philosophical and religious background to kind of contextualize it, it's really fascinating. So it was after the first, like, and we might have talked about this last time, but like the first 2-3 weeks when everybody was still trying to figure out if this was going to wipe out the planet. And then it turned out that it wasn't real quick because all the elite people went on doing what they were doing. And you're like, oh, well, they're not scared.
Right.
They're not like ditching their posts at MSNBC and running and hiding somewhere in their like pedophile bunker, somewhere in Nevada, right? They're still doing this stuff. So it's like, okay, well, they don't think this is real. So obviously it's not real. Like that was an easy thing to see within a couple of weeks. And then what developed out of that is like, oh no, like half the population thinks this is still going to wipe out the planet. Like, why do they think that? It seems pretty obvious that that's not the case. And then watching this sort of mass hysteria to take place, it became quite obvious that these people were lacking any kind of meaning and purpose in their life completely. There was complete void blackness in their soul.
Yeah.
And they needed something to latch onto, to believe again, to have a reason to be alive. Their reason to be alive was, we're all in this together, right?
Yeah.
Mask up. And you start seeing like we've said a million times, the mask becomes, like a sacrament, and Fauci becomes the high priest, and the communion is the thing, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to get you demonetized. So, that was pretty easy to see. And then, of course, what's the natural pagan religion sort of follow through to that is that when it inevitably doesn't work out, kind of like the Great Awakenings, right? When Christ doesn't come in 1861 on November 5th, right? And then he doesn't come the next year, he doesn't come okay, well, COVID didn't happen. All right, well, you obviously have to forgive me, right? Because there's still underneath that, there's still that Christian sort of, idea of forgiveness, ultimate forgiveness. But they're not really asking for forgiveness. They're not actually looking to repent. They're publicly forgiving themselves,
right? Which
is what a pagan would do, right?
Yes.
That's exactly what they've always done. So this inversion of Christianity just continues into perpetuity. And it to help you maybe segue again, kind of helps you see sort of the natural spiritual battle that's been going on throughout kind of human history through, the demons versus the Trinitarian God. It's not really a versus because the demons can't actually do anything to God. They can only corrupt you, right? This is what scripture tells us. So when we see human beings acting like that, we put 2 and 2 together and say, well, they're demonically possessed. This is the exact example of demonic possession that we see in the Old and the New Testaments all over the place. And it's the anti-Christians, the Antichrist. It's the opposition to Christ, the inversion of the metaphor, right? So I think that spiritual reality is playing out again, and it's playing out in kind of a global way. I think because Christendom, like the idea of a Christian society, is as tenuous as it's been in the world probably since the beginning of Christianity, right? There's tension between paganism and Christianity like there was in like the 3rd century right now. And I think that's why you're seeing that play out on such a large scale. And I hope that it goes the way that it did the last time. But I have a feeling that it won't. And what will end up coming out of it will be some sort of Christian-ish inversion of like a right-wing sort of antichrist who kind of comes and sort of subverts sort of secular Christianity and uses that as a way to solidify political power, which I think would make a lot of maybe some mutual friends happy in a lot of ways that I would completely disagree with as being a positive. So,
okay. Is there's going to be people that hear this that generally agree with you and me and will say, look, I get it. It does seem maybe there's some kind of spiritual battle. And I think you even got into a little bit of this with Carlos on the Los Libertinos show when you went on there, and it's like, you might think it's spiritual. I just see it as XYZ. Libertarianism will, it's just the John Stossel libertarians will go, well, it's just people making stupid decisions. The more right-leaning libertarians will say, no, there's evil people in power, but they won't necessarily go that next step and say, this is spiritual warfare. What are your thoughts on that kind of view? And maybe just, look, there's bad things going on. Yes, I'm on your side. I think these are awful and these people should be, XYZ again. And maybe that's when they become not on our side. But what are your thoughts on that view?
So I think we've become very accustomed in kind of the postmodern age, well, and really through most of modernity as well, to compartmentalizing or boxing in portions of our lives.
Yes.
So we have our politics here and our Christianity here and our whatever over here, our family over here and our work over here. And so we tend to, as a culture, even most Christians, once we're done with the Christian thing we're doing, we just basically become atheists for the rest of the week until we do the Christian thing again. And I think a lot of people who are not Christians, or at least maybe Christian adjacent, sort of see that and they think that's Christianity. And so therefore it's just a choice and I don't really need to choose it. Right. Yes. And that's again, hearkening back to a byproduct of a lot of lecturing and not enough participation.
Yes.
Right. I think there is no way to prove spiritual warfare to somebody. Right. I can't do that. I don't think there's any way to do that. And no one's going to bring you kicking and screaming into the kingdom of God. Right. I can't force you to be a Christian.
Right.
Right. I think when you actually go and participate in a divine liturgy and really participate in an Orthodox church, you're going to see it change you. If you really let down your ego and your guard and your walls, you'll see it change you. You'll see it change your viewpoint on everything. I don't mean your intellectual viewpoint on everything, right? I think one of the problems, again, Western Christianity has, it's an intellectual conceptualization of God, right? Because there is no energies in Western Christianity. It's just the essence thing. It's very Neoplatonic. There is no energy. So there is no way to communicate with this God who's far off over there, who can't really see you. As a matter of fact, the word energies doesn't even translate really well into Latin. So that's probably why it got left out. So to get someone to do that, to go and stand for 3 hours and do it every Sunday and hopefully every Saturday and Sunday and then every day if you can, I think they probably have to admit to themselves something along the lines of, I'm not happy, right? And because I think we define happy as I have stuff and I can pay my bills and there's food in the refrigerator and my kids are going to school. And ultimately, I think that's good. There's nothing wrong with being comfortable, right? To the point where you're not being persecuted in the street yet. You're not, you know what I mean? Right. There's nothing wrong with that, but understanding that that's not you, right? If you think you have all that stuff because of you, you're going to find eventually you're not going to be content with it. It's not going to fulfill you. Your cup's not going to be full, literally filled up. When you start to participate really in the energies and start to participate in the church and the divine liturgy, it changes you to a point where you just have a completely different view on everything. And it's not like someone is speaking to you for an hour and a half about changing your views on everything, right? You're singing hymns, you're listening to the priest, you're bowing, you're genuflecting, you're doing the sign of the cross. You're not really doing anything intellectual. And somehow it still changes you, completely changes you, magically, mystically, spiritually. Until somebody can accept that, they're not going to accept on its face an intellectual argument that there's a spiritual battle happening. They're going to be wandering around in the middle of a war, not realizing there's a war going on. And that's a really, really good way to die. As you ask anybody who's been in the military. So you see bullets flying at you, right? So I think there's really, I heard Father Stephen DeYoung say something like this. I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't memorize things well. But something to the effect of, there's really no way for an Orthodox priest or Orthodox Christian to talk to a non-Orthodox person in the West without using some kind of argumentation.
Yeah.
Right. Because that's just the way our minds are kind of work. We didn't grow up in that culture. We didn't grow up cradle Orthodox in the East, right? We don't have that phronema naturally. So there might not be any way to do it other than argumentation, or to just get them to go and to see and talk to the priest afterward and kind of just be open to it. And if you are open to it, I promise you it will change you. And once it changes you, then you'll realize everything that we're saying here is true. It can't not change you. I mean, if you're super evil, it might make you more evil, but it's still going to change you, right? You're going to react to it and be like, no, I can't be good. God, oh my goodness, right? So it's going to actually change you that way, but it's going to change you somehow. And once you see and experience that, then it opens up your mind to a whole host of things that aren't like provable, right? You're just going to see it and you're going to know it's true.
For those that do like the quote unquote provable aspect of things, it is a Western thing. But there is an attraction learning the Bible now to me because of the provable parts. And again, if that's a shortcoming, so be it. It is. If it's not, then hopefully it's not. But when you can prove certain things, I understand the Bible is not supposed to look like a history book. I think that's the case. I'm still learning that as well. But for instance, the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, etc., there's points people will say, well, there's inconsistencies in that. And to me, it's like, yeah, there are inconsistencies in little parts of it. It's very consistent in the big parts of it, the most important things. I find that appealing because I've heard you say before, and it's funny, I had wanted to ask you this question, then I heard you answer it on a different show, and I thought, well, I'm still going to ask it because we were both going there with it. But it would be more weird if there was 100% agreement across the board within all of the Gospels. That would seem like, they must have all been together and written this. We know they weren't. So can you talk about that? And the part, like, there is some provable aspects of Christianity. And I guess I want to get your thoughts on some of that.
Well, to sort of the historicity, right? As far as I can tell, everything that 19th century German scholars forward have claimed is not quote unquote true historically in the Bible there hasn't been anything really confirming that, right? Everything that's been found archaeologically, right, has confirmed the Orthodox tradition. Everything. There hasn't been anything found that confirms the atheist position. Correct. At all, right? So it's not like these books happen in a vacuum. Now, did like the book of Genesis literally happen? Like, it's kind of a silly question because it's not a question anybody prior to the 1500s would have asked, right? Right. Like, it's like watching a movie like watching Lord of the Rings and watching a scene and turning to your significant other and being like, that ring's true to me, right? Does that mean Lord of the Rings is true? Like, it literally happened. I mean, it's the idea of what's true. Is the story true, right? So, and it's not like the early church, and you know this, it wasn't like the early church wasn't aware that there isn't total agreement in the 4 gospel accounts, right? like they weren't idiots, right? They could read them and see, but those are the 4 they picked. It was those were the 4 accounts that they always picked, right? It wasn't like they had 20 in the Roman Catholic Church, Dan Brown, right? Like gets rid of 16 of them and murders a bunch of people. They had those 4. They always had those 4, and they fought to defend those 4. It seems pretty clear that Mark was probably written as a follower of St. Peter, right? And he has a particular story he's trying to tell. Matthew has a particular story he's trying to tell. Luke, it seems like, uses those 2, right, as source material. And there's nothing like wrong with that. That's what human beings do all the time, right? We don't, right. For example, we don't look at a 10th century or let's say 1st century BC account of Julius Caesar and like question it ever. Right. Or Alexander the Great, of which there are like 6 manuscripts in the Bible. There's like 6,000, right? And we don't question the historicity of that. Yeah. Like, nobody questions that Abraham Lincoln like was a human that lived on the planet. But I mean, I wasn't alive then. Yeah. Can I prove it? Right. But like, nobody questions these things. But for some reason with the Bible, there's a completely different standard by which it's judged in the modern age. And so, yeah, with the accounts, sure, like I wouldn't expect my recollection of something to be the same as your recollection of something.
Yeah.
And even I went to the Jimmy Buffett concert with my buddy a couple months ago down in, in Long Island. And we were in the car and I brought up a story that I remember vividly from when we were in high school back in the 90s. And he didn't remember that happening at all. Does that mean it didn't happen? Right? Or it didn't happen the way I specifically remembered it happened? Maybe it didn't happen quite like that. You know what I mean? And we're talking about gospel accounts that were written, decades afterward. All of Paul's epistles were written before there was a gospel account written.
Right.
So, I mean that most people don't even know that, right? And it seems that they were written because the apostles were being martyred. They're eventually all dying. So this oral tradition had to be written down somehow. So you're looking at human perspectives. You're looking at different audiences that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and St. John were writing to. They're trying to convey different ideas to, in some cases, the Jewish people, in some cases to Gentile people, in some cases, as in Luke Acts, right? The 2-part volume, it's historical account from people he's kind of interviewing, right? And then, St. John comes along a lot later, and I think it's pretty widely agreed upon that he had access to all 3 of the previous gospel accounts. So he doesn't feel the need to comment on them, right? And so we wouldn't really judge any other work this way. We wouldn't say like, well, this person's definitive account of Thomas Jefferson is the truth, and therefore every other book written on Thomas Jefferson is completely false. Throw them all in the garbage, burn them. Frank Smith's 1916 Oxford, Cambridge study of Thomas Jefferson is the one honest truth, right? Like, no, all of books of Thomas Jefferson are probably accurate, like, but they're not mostly written by people who knew Thomas Jefferson. So whereas the gospel accounts and the epistles and everything in the New Testament is written by people who knew the apostles, who knew Christ, or by the apostles themselves. And that firsthand knowledge, I don't see any reason to doubt the historicity of any of that. People will come and say things like, well, the book of Revelation is just crazy business. But if they read Ezekiel and they read Isaiah and they understand the prophets in the Old Testament, they'll understand St. John's allusions to all of those visions, right? It's not complicated stuff. If you look at it in the context it was written in then, which nobody wants to do, they just want to kind of say what they've heard about, whether it's Buddy Jesus or whatever. They're just parroting stuff. Or, what the woman say to me on Facebook today, defending like the live and let live. That's not what Jesus says. Jesus says we should love each other and not to judge. And I'm like, yeah, not really. Let me point out the Greek and the Hebrew there and try to walk you through this. And then also, yes, we're supposed to love everybody and not, accost them on the street and hand them tracts and then run away and never talk to them again either. Right. So, the historicity of the Bible, even something like the House of David, there was a scroll found very recently that has the words House of David written on it from Mesopotamia. Prior to that, David didn't quote unquote exist in archaeological or historical circles or biblical circles, right? These atheist circles. And now they're like, oh, well, some of them are like trying to, well, it's not David, it's this word over here. Right? But as far as I can tell, there's never been anything that's been discovered that disproves any of this. There was another story, I think, Father Stephen Young was telling about St. Thomas in India, where everybody, in the scholarly circles doubted that St. Thomas ever went to India because the person in tradition that he's supposed to have gone to, who was the king there, had a name that wasn't like Indian or something. It was a completely crazy name. Yeah. And then, 5, 6, 7 years ago, they find a coin in India with that guy's name on it, right? Like this just keeps happening over and over and over and over again. So not that I need that proof to do what I do and believe what I believe, and we shouldn't. But that these stories are somehow just made up, or that the early Christian church was like just too stupid to notice, differences. I think they understood these are 4 perspectives on the life of Christ that are telling a true story in their own way. And they liked the idea of those 4 perspectives. They worked together very harmoniously to tell a story that they wanted, that they thought was the life of Christ, that Christ wanted them to communicate. So, and Another thing just to tack on to the end of this is the sort of snippet Bible verse people, which I don't know about you. I make it a point never to like quote a Bible verse without like ever on Facebook, Instagram, even if I'm on a show. I might point out a book of the Bible, or I might do a large passage and try to explain it in context as best I can. That's another problem, as you know, because of course you can make any particular Bible verse mean whatever the heck you want it to mean out of context. So that gets used a lot by both atheists and Christians, especially conservative evangelical Christians. Like the passage of the day or something that you put up. And it's like, well, yeah, hermeneutically, it kind of means what you could kind of make it mean what you, but it's a dangerous road to go down, because next thing you know, people are going to use Matthew 20:12 or something to justify the Holocaust. And you don't want to play around in that game and risk the consequences, because you know, I don't want to carry around the body count of Lutheranism if I don't have to.
Yeah, and like you mentioned there, atheists use that trick quite often. Oh yeah, well, I disagree with you politically, and here's a Bible verse to cite. You must have to agree with this, you know, as if they have some kind of special church father interpretation of it. And one of the things atheists have said over the years, guilty here as charged, because I was one. I don't believe atheism in itself strictly exists, but let's say agnostics, and I was one. And I would say, without religion, all of these wars that I don't like would not happen, because I was using a very secular, what I would call agnostic libertarian understanding of the world. And I want your opinion, because I guess what I'm getting at is, I would say, without religion back then, it almost pains me to say now, without religion, a lot of these problems wouldn't happen. And now I start to look around and I think, without atheism, a lot of these problems wouldn't happen. And certainly without demonic spirituality, paganism, etc., a lot of these problems wouldn't happen. What's your thoughts on that type of thing?
Well, I think without government, these things wouldn't happen, right? I think a lot of times people look at, you know, the something like the Inquisition or the Crusades, or even the middle to late Byzantine Empire, as sort of like that's Christianity, right? And that really isn't. That's like government co-opting a religion and using it to go and kill a bunch of people. I mean, it's the 30 Years' War, right? It's the, you know, King Charles I being beheaded. It's Oliver Cromwell. It's slavery and colonialism. Like, that's not Christianity. That's government co-opting Christianity to go and do horrible, horrible things. Like, the Christian church didn't really ever do anything horrible. I mean, the secular authorities are the ones who even killed people under the Inquisition. The Catholic Church didn't even like actually murder anybody. They just excommunicated them, and the civil authorities are the ones that performed the act, right? It's not like the Catholic Church said, go murder them, right? That wasn't like up to them.
Right.
So, I mean, just to defend my Roman Catholic brothers and sisters for a second there, and the Crusades, I mean, the Fourth Crusade, the Roman Catholics attacked the Eastern Orthodox, right? Like, it's so, but it wasn't like, you know, your local pastor at the Greek Orthodox Church down the road is like leading the charge with a broadsword. Right. Now, there are venerated saints who fought military campaigns. That is true, right? And for that, I would hearken back to what we see in like the Book of Judges or Joshua, or, you know, First through Fourth Kingdoms, which is essentially when it's sort of, okay, let's do the, I hate to default to this, but no one's arguing that the Allies toppling the Nazis was like brutalizing a peaceful pagan religion, right? Like, there's mass genocide, all kinds of crazy shit, right, going on with World War II. So we'll just pick the Nazis because everybody knows who they are, or Stalin and the communists. Or, no one's going to argue that Hitler shouldn't have been, and the Nazi Party shouldn't have been gotten rid of, right? Like, they were, you know, so the way I would look at like the pagan world, because we've romanticized paganism in our culture and pretend that it's like all peaceful and loving and everybody's worshiping flowers and right. No, they were like, having ritual sex and demonic worship, like with slave women in temples, the temple prostitutes. They were ritually murdering their children, right? Like they were doing evil things. So if you're talking about, Christian martyr who goes into that, well, most of them evangelized and then they built or reappropriated the pagan temple or whatever. They just made it Christian, put a Christian marker there. They buried a Christian martyr there. But if there's an actual campaign to end that brutality, I don't think most people conceptually would disagree with that. But for some reason, we can't get that idea and we can't accept that idea that Christianity was actually doing something good because we don't see it as good in this culture. We don't see Christianity as good. And
why is that? Why don't you think we do?
I think because most Christians don't act very Christian.
Okay.
I mean, that's my opinion, but I mean, it's an opinion based on like the entire Bible, right? The Jewish people, the Israelites, let's say the Israelites, so we don't confuse people with Judah and Judea and Jews, right? The Israelites are called to be God's people and they never are, right? All they do is turn away from him all the time and do horrible, wicked, disgusting things. I don't see why most Christians would be any different, right? Like Christianity, it's a different covenant. It's a new covenant. It's a new deal that God is making with his people. It's a larger group of people who are now brought and grafted into the church.
Right.
But it doesn't change human nature. It doesn't change that we like to take the easy way out. It doesn't, change the fact that even though we don't worship Zeus, we worship power. We don't worship Ares, but we worship war. We don't worship Aphrodite, but we worship sex, right? We haven't changed as human beings. Our nature is still the same. So most Christians just don't act very Christian. And it gives a lot of ammo to people who are not Christian to be like, well, why would I do that?
Right.
Right. So I really, and tell me if I'm wrong about this. I don't see the church fathers anywhere condemning, or not condemning is the wrong word, but speaking out against non-Christians. All they do is communicate to Christians. This is stop doing this and do that, right? Like Paul is talking to Christian churches in his epistles. Peter, John, Jude, James, right? And all the church fathers are talking to Christians, telling them how to live a life because they're not living it that way. St. John Chrysostom is not talking to pagan Hindus about how to be Christian. He's talking to Christians. So this is kind of the Christian plight. Is Christianity is actually really, really difficult. Sorry, Protestants. It's very hard. And when we make it easy, we're taking God and we're bringing him down and we're making him into what we want him to be so we can be comfortable rather than realizing he wants us to be something we're not and becoming that thing, right? Theosis, divination, to change ourselves to become like him, right? If that message doesn't get out to people, Christians and atheists and whomever alike, then they're going to continue to have this corrupted version, which just isn't going to work very well. And it's not going to end well, right? It's going to end exactly how I think it's going to end, which is essentially an antichrist figure taking the banner of Christianity and basically leading everybody into destruction. And I'm not saying that's the end of the world. We've seen this before.
Yeah, sure. Right.
It just, this cycle plays out again, and there's many, many, many antichrists throughout history. Correct. I know Steve Messina won't like that, but that's essentially the thing that got him to stop talking to me.
Well, that is true. And that's, I interviewed the author of a book I've got called Antichrist. And that was a point. It's not that there's just one Antichrist coming and that's it. That's the end of the world. This has happened for thousands of years. There's many Antichrists. And I want to get your thoughts really quick to go back to kind of what we were just talking about is the, how do I phrase this? There's people, like you just said, it's not necessarily easy. And you said, sorry, Protestants, because it's not, especially someone who's new to Orthodoxy, such as myself. A friend said recently, I'm glad that that's what's bringing you happiness and joy. And on one hand, there's aspects of that for sure, but it's like, this is not all happiness and joy. It's just not. This is hard. It's like saying, if you go from the couch every day to CrossFit and someone goes, man, you have a new family there with this CrossFit, because a lot of you, maybe you and certainly me, I've lived with this, and some of my listeners will understand the CrossFit thing almost is churchy to an extent. There's certain language involved in it and certain rituals that involved in it. And it is hard, and there are elements of joy, but it's not like you go, I'm sure glad that CrossFit's bringing you so much joy and happiness. It's like, well, yeah, that's part of it, but it makes me feel it's really hard. It hurts a lot. There's things that I have to change that I'm doing that hurt physically, mentally, all of these things. So to my point, and I want to get your thoughts on this, it's not easy. It does hurt. It is hard. And do you see any of that, for one? And then two, latch this answer on, is there dangers to becoming Orthodox for people in your mind?
Dangers to becoming Orthodox. Well, not truly becoming Orthodox.
Correct.
Not truly, right?
Yes. And I said this, maybe it was to you, and so sorry to interrupt, but to that point, I think I said to you, sometimes I want to go, you know what? It's not for everyone. But in reality, it is for everyone. So there's that kind of dichotomy there.
Yeah, well, if there's definitely something I can say about the Orthodox Christian faith, it's that the churches aren't packed, right?
Yeah.
So it is not something that seems to be for everyone in their current state, right? In the current state they are in their life, it's always a good time, but it takes, for me, it took a lot of time just to go to a divine liturgy.
Yeah.
Right. It's not difficult. I grew up Roman Catholic, but it's not difficult for me to walk into a Roman Catholic church any day of the week, do whatever. I don't have a problem. I don't have a problem walking into a Protestant church ever. It is very, very difficult for me to get to a divine liturgy. It's very hard. And there's something about it that, like, so somebody said once you really discover Christianity, all of a sudden everything starts going wrong in your life. Your car won't start. Your refrigerator breaks down. Your dog gets sick,
yes,
right? Like all of a sudden, it's like the demons are trying to keep you from going there. If you're like going there, like driving 80 miles an hour to get there and nothing's getting in your way, it's probably not like the right thing. And I think it was definitely an Orthodox priest that said that. And he said, I've never met anybody coming into the Orthodox faith where it all of a sudden everything bad didn't just start happening in their life immediately.
Boy, is that the truth
to keep them out of that. And
yes.
And I would say that's my experience as well. But I would say that the thing that the inversion for me that's changing is that, and I think a lot of people will hopefully see this analogy, that before this kind of interest in semi-conversion and growth in the Orthodox faith, I was very, very comfortable with myself, and I saw a lot of horrible things going on in the world. I think this is a general libertarian, maybe atheist sort of like, I believe in me, right? Yeah. I can do this if I just set my mind to it. Like, I'm strong. And then you have a really bad day and you get down, you get right back up again, right? Why do we fall, Bruce? Right? That kind of thing. And there's all this kind of evil in the world, and we have to fight injustice and evil in the world. And I think what you see as you start to kind of learn orthodoxy and become part of the faith is that you start to see beauty and love and joy in the world.
Yes.
And you start to see pain and struggle in yourself. And that was, for me, that's the hardest thing about it, is because I have to confront all of the awful things that I've been, all of the awful things I continue to do every day. I have to confront that in myself. And I feel so ashamed of those things that it's hard for me to go there and stand in the presence of all of these people and in the presence of God. It's hard to do that because I feel horrible, right? But when I'm out in the world, I see all the joy and the beauty of the world around me, and I want to participate in nature and friends and hanging out with people and talking and communicating and taking the dog for a walk and doing yard work, and there's just all this beauty in the world where all of that other like material stuff just sort of fades away. Like I don't, and I don't choose to watch things like the news because they're like, I know what's going on in the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And my job is to work on myself, work on being an example in my community. And, at some point, maybe get on, be on your podcast and try to be an example to other people, or at the very least, let them see the struggle going on that I'm going through, so they can kind of hopefully empathize and see something in themselves. But I think that sort of inversion of how you see the world and yourself is really the ultimate change. And if, being in the presence of God frightens the shit out of you, that is what's supposed to happen. And if it frightens you so much, you double down on that loving yourself stuff. I mean, that'll tell you something too.
It's a strong endpoint there, Adam. Yeah. Well put. Well put. Do you have, we'll get out of here in just a second. And I was going to ask you for parting words, but those are pretty good ones. Do you even describe yourself politically at all anymore?
I want peace.
Okay.
I want whatever or whomever system of earthly governance that's going to bring the most amount of peace to the most amount of people. I don't want to see anyone murdered, persecuted. I don't want to see war. I don't want to see anger. I don't want to see famine. I don't want to see heartbreak. I just want peace. So if we're going to live in a society where we have to, quote unquote, choose our own rulers, which is not my preferable style of governance.
Right.
I'm perfectly fine with divine right of kings, right?
Yeah.
For as many reasons, I'm sure as your listeners can surmise from your other guests and yourself, that ultimately as Christians, we just pray for peace.
Yes.
And then that's kind of it. So, you know, on a local level, I've kind of sort of paid a little bit of attention this year, but not really much. This particular area of the country, believe it or not, even though it's like deeply blue, really didn't like affect me much through COVID and stuff. Like we were pretty insulated here. And so I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful for the amount of peace that was able to, I mean, I could see in other parts of the country and the world.
Yeah.
You know, the COVID stuff got really, even just in New York, I'm only like 45 minutes outside New York City. I mean, I won't go there. That's bad. It's like Babylon, dude. Like I can't set foot. I used to love New York City when I was young. Like love going down there, you know, all the art and the culture and the community and the food. It's just a wasteland now, wasteland of just evil. But here, I mean, we're only 45 minutes away. People wore masks and stuff a little bit, but like, no one ever said a word to me about anything.
Yeah.
Came and went as I pleased. Like the businesses getting shut down wasn't cool, but you know, eventually they opened. I mean, so I think that's it. It just politically, I'm just looking for peace.
Mm-hmm. Well put. Plug away. Anything. We got the new show coming. Give people dates, explanation of it. Anything you want, Adam.
Well, I'm not going to do dates, but I'm hoping to get some stuff out by the beginning of the year. Some like original me interviewing people that hopefully someone has heard of outside of our kind of milieu. I love doing these. Like this is what I really, really want to do. Yeah. But at some point I need to talk to like a scholar, an expert, somebody who isn't a layman like myself. I really need to do that because I don't think I couldn't carry what I want to do myself. There's no way I could do it. Yeah. I love listening to people who could talk for 2 hours into a microphone about something they're knowledgeable about. I can't do that. Yeah. So that's what I love to do. I've reached out to maybe 3 or 4 dozen people. That's a lot. And got a couple I think that'll work out really well. It's, you know, I'm one of probably thousands of emails that they're looking at or whatever. Yeah. So you try to get people the best you can. And then hopefully, you know, intermingle that with some, you know, friendly conversations with kind of you guys, you know, but the idea being to kind of extrapolate and expand on this information and really get the information into people's possession so they can consume the information so that they have an idea that what they're seeing, there's more to it than what they're seeing. So hopefully by the beginning of the year, and then I'll kind of replay conversations with yourself and with Justin and with Carlos and whomever kind of in the meantime, because it's been like a year since I put anything out. So kind of prepare that way. And then we'll see, you know, I won't name drop anybody because nothing's like literally recorded yet. So. Right.
Yeah. Fair. And for people that geek out on terms like that you and I would understand, that your RSS feed, if they were already subscribed to You're Talking Over Me, will this just be a natural thing that pops up in their...
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. That was for my own personal...
Yep. I went with the same pod hosting site, the same website, just change the URL. So it should all just stick. Granted, I'm not Buck Johnson, so I had to do this myself, but I think I did it myself. I think I got it to work. So yeah, so it is the Age of Information with Adam at the Age of Information. Once I figure out how to access that email address, I will totally respond to the people who are emailing me. So
Okay. And Twitter presence?
nah,
Don't want to. Okay.
I don't think so.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, then. Adam, Patrick, thanks so much, man. This has been awesome. The Age of Information coming our way soon. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Buck.
All right, I hope you guys enjoyed the chat with my friend, Adam Patrick. Next week's episode is a good one. I haven't recorded it yet, but let's drop some hints. These people are asking for amnesty, aren't they? Oh, let's move past these mistakes from the COVID cult over the last several years. We asked for forgiveness. Well, what do? Forgive? Amnesty? I have a guest returning to the show next week. He's been on multiple times. A lot of you know who he is and are very familiar with him. That's all of the hints I can give you right now, but we're going to dive right into that. Amnesty, forgiveness, all of those things y'all did over the COVID years. Lockdowns, jab mandates, people losing their jobs, you calling us out like we're ignorant, backwards fools, and looks like holding strong, being a pure blood was your best bet, doesn't it? We'll get into all of that and more. As for this show, patreon.com/counterflow, $5 a month or more gets you into those Zoom calls. Follow me on Twitter @BuckRebel, BuckRebel, and on Instagram. I've got an account specifically for this show. I'll pull it up really quick before, I think I dropped it last week, but it's a new account, so I couldn't totally remember the name. There it is. Search on Instagram, Counterflow Podcast 2022, and see what you come up with. I think you'll find my profile. And give me a follow request, and you can connect through there as well. Until next week, when we drop the show on amnesty and forgiveness for the COVID cult. You guys have a good one. See ya.
You get split in fucking half, the icon, the hologram graph. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Counterflow podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.